Welcome to The Culture. We rest at the pulse of the community, providing all things news, music, fashion, events, and everything that we talk about in between. It's a lifestyle. We are The Culture. Hi, and welcome to the show today. I'm your host, Jessica Garrett-Modkins, and joining us today is Kamalah Fletcher, who is a nonprofit leader and entrepreneur with a specialization in community engagement, disaster response, and community development. She has over 20 years of experience in this sector, and she's the founder of A Little Help Never Hurt. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We thought that it was very appropriate to have you on to speak to us about just disaster preparedness, hurricane awareness, and the like. But first, I want to start off with A Little Help Never Hurt. Tell us a little bit about that. Such a catchy name.
Yeah, well, A Little Help Never Hurt is my consulting firm, and the name came out of the fact that I know how to do a lot of things, and it's easier for you to tell me what you need, and then I can tell you if I know how to help you. And if I don't know how to help you, I know somebody who knows how to help you. And then also a lot of the big things that we're trying to solve in the world and in the nonprofit world, the interventions that I specialize in are the little things that we might take for granted or think that are not important, but actually those root causes and those root solutions that if you don't attend to them, they can make everything else go wrong. So I want to get in there and help attend to some of the little things that make a big difference.
And then as it relates to disaster relief, community engagement, how did you find yourself in that industry?
So, the first part would have been I'm the child of immigrants. And so, when you leave your home, you learn to make it work with whatever you have. Then the next major thing in my life was that my parents were in the military. And so as a military child, preparedness in all its forms, both how to prepare when your parent has to go away, how to prepare for whatever may happen because your family is in the military. So just this idea of being ready for anything has always been a part of my life. And then I was a Girl Scout, and preparedness is just a way of life. And then in the more formal disaster relief and disaster preparedness and humanitarian aid world, I was working, I used to work at Catalyst Miami, and the last project I worked on there was beginning the work that they're involved in now around climate change. And I was learning about resilience. And when I was thinking about what my next step would be, I went to the Red Cross because it was this idea of exploring and understanding the world, the formal world of resilience as a sector a little bit more and a little bit more intimately. And then I really, once I got in there, because before I joined the Red Cross, I was aware of, a friend of mine had a fire. The Red Cross came and helped her. My family had benefited from the Red Cross and different disasters that happened in Jamaica. So I knew a little bit about it. But once I got in there and really saw all that was involved in what I call now the disaster machine, I was like, well, I know a lot of things. I know a lot of things about help in Miami and South Florida and even nationally sometimes. And if I don't know what they do, if I don't know enough about this, then I know a lot of folks don't either. And so I really enjoyed the fact that I was allowed to really get in there, build my awareness and understanding of it, and learn how to translate it into smaller chunks or concepts or even language and feeling that would help it be meaningful to people who I always want to help and people in communities that I care about.
Do you think that this field chose you, or do you think that you chose it?
I think it chose me. I have led my career, I spent my career kind of going where I felt led and going where things were of interest or where I felt like I could make a contribution. And so I think it definitely was a joining together and, I think it found me and I found it at the same time. But I really enjoyed, it's definitely not easy because especially when you're of a community, right? So these are people that you have intimate relationships with. This is a community where I care about the ground, I care about the neighborhoods, I care about the buildings, I care about the human beings. And so the idea of being that liaison for the support of all of that can be very heavy, but definitely I'm really glad that I have this body of knowledge now that I can share in settings like this as well, even though I'm not, I don't work directly in it as much anymore, but I definitely feel like I have some things that I'd like to share and communicate with the community.
What are some misconceptions, do you think, as it relates to just a general disaster that people just don't take to heart?
I would say every disaster and the response kind of has its own personality, right? Every kind of storm, every kind of disaster. So you have the everyday disasters like home fires, right? The disaster is anything that you kind of can't recover from immediately or that overwhelms a system. So it could be the police, a fire, whatever. And so, a hurricane, because we have notice, right? They start following hurricanes when they just have a little number called the invest number when it's starting to form off the coast of Africa, usually in the Atlantic, and it moves up. And so the ideas and expectations, right, around what happens in a hurricane is different than what might happen in a tornado, where what you call like a no notice event, those kinds of things. So everyone has a different personality, but I think the biggest thing that we don't necessarily always get to have the conversation about is the fact that we are at the center of our preparedness. And then there's satellites and things that come out from there. But we may, I don't know that is as much a part of the conversation. There's definitely the recommendation of, you'll hear, get a kit, have a plan, practice that plan, right? So that's definitely your sort of like basic, like building blocks of your preparedness. And then there's a conversation of what does it mean for me to be prepared, right? So as much as I come from this world and I've worked in it and I've deployed a ton of times, my family doesn't evacuate, right? Like my father's not going anywhere. My grandmother, we're like, who's got the strongest house? Where's all the food gonna go? Everybody hunkers down there unless something like really kind of catastrophic is being predicted. And that's the reality, right? Like there's even the conversation of evacuation, right? There's like, do I leave my home? What is it gonna mean for me to leave my home? I can't predict when I can come back to my home. What is it gonna take for me to sustain myself wherever it is that I'm going to evacuate to, whether it's evacuating within your city to an evacuation center, or if you decide to go out of town to a place where the storm isn't threatening. And then now, of course, because of climate change, the frequency of storms is increased, the severity of the storms is increased, and the path isn't as predictable as it once was, right? So I think, people hear that I live in Miami, I'm in Boston right now. I got stuck because I couldn't come home because my flights got canceled because of the storm. So people here in Miami say, oh, I don't know how you live in Miami, but like Carolinas experience just as much. The west coast of Florida has been getting hit more in the recent past. So it's not the same anymore. And the length of time and how they're moving and how fast they're moving, all of that is impacted both by how many buildings, right? Like what development looks like impacts it, what we do with our waterways, what we're doing with pollution and climate change broadly. So, it's very unpredictable, but one of the more important things that I would like to communicate, well, let me not say would like to communicate, because the other challenge is that, when you're in it, it's hard to hear the things that are outside of, please get me the thing that I need, right? But I would say that the system is expecting that every day of the year that we are doing as individuals all that we can to be prepared for what it takes to prepare ourselves. So that means saving money, having insurance in all of the different forms, making sure you have enough water, et cetera, all those things. So there's what the system expects, and then there's what we do. And then sometimes there's what the system does to us that makes us less able to be prepared on an individual basis, right? So I think because, and especially in South Florida, because, there was Hurricane Wilma, and then there wasn't anything for a long time. And then I think it was maybe 13 years later, Irma came. So now that we're unfortunately having more experiences lately, I think the conversation can now go from make a kit, have a plan, a gallon of water per person per day for 3 days. And it can get to, it's getting to what does it mean for a community to be prepared? What does it mean for us to say, okay, if I'm going to evacuate, what's the strongest building in our community? Do we have access to it? What does it take to do that? What are the outside things that can support? And then also the continued work on making sure that the systems that we live in contribute to our own ability to do what we're expected to do to be prepared.
You brought up an interesting point and talked about evacuation and whether or not you have the monetary ability to evacuate, and what does that look like if you were to leave your home. I remember, I believe it was like maybe in 2017, South Florida, I don't know which hurricane it was. It might have been Michael.
Irma.
It was Irma. Okay. And we were traveling to Georgia, and I remember overhearing a conversation of two people. One was asking the person that was there working at the gas station what made them stay. And I remember distinctly the man said, I can't leave. I don't have any money. I live paycheck to paycheck. If I'm working now because I have to work, I'm staying because I don't have the ability to go anywhere else. And it was at that moment that I realized that evacuation isn't a luxury. It is not something that everyone has the ability to even comprehend, or even to allow it to be a decision. I've never heard that be a conversation on a grand scale about how do you help those who don't have the financial means to evacuate. Have you been in any circles where that's been a conversation, or do you know any resources for those that maybe during another season, a time where there is a situation where they may need to leave their home and because of a storm, what they should do?
I would say, there's a lot more what we'll call like grassroots, right? Like of community, made up of residents, local folks, local leaders, local activists, who are doing a lot more work to make sure that some of the resources get directed locally. And then also to organize people who have the means, who have a vehicle, who have whatever to either transport people, et cetera. And there are also now funds that are available that people can sometimes apply to. Sometimes nonprofits will, they've learned that they need to direct funding that way. So I would say Miami Climate Alliance and all of the satellite groups that are connected through there. Access Helps is another way. I think it used to be Aunt Bertha, but I'm not sure. But there's different ways that you can find out. Sometimes it's connected to climate resilience work, and groups that are working on climate change also are very focused on preparedness and making it hyper local, because we are our own first responders, right? Like both in the help your neighbor, both in the after the storm passes, you come outside, you look side to side, go check and see who's okay. So there are now, I think, more opportunities for people to be able to access a little bit of support. But there's a little bit of a rule of thumb that you hunker down from wind and you run from water, right? So that is generally why evacuation mandates are usually around people who are in flood zones. Researching, making sure sort of where your flood zones are. I would say pay attention to the insurance industry. I think tends to be a little more conservative around what's considered a flood zone. So, that's another way to sort of assess whether or not you might want to leave. What happens in rain events, right? Then that's going to help you understand maybe what's going to happen, maybe with storm surge, et cetera. So, so it's really that decision about, if you're going to hunker down from wind, the strength and the the structural integrity, right? The strength of the building that you're in is going to be the important thing. If you're dealing with water, it's how to make sure that you can both have the things that you need, not be inundated. The structure, the strength of the structure is also important in that sense too. And then usually going to an evacuation center is most crucial for somebody who's really going to have a challenge with water and flooding, et cetera. And then I would say understanding what damage assessment, because I think the other point that I learned in all of that world is that this idea that when people talk about the impact of a storm or the impact of a disaster, really property damage is at the core of that. And it feels really crappy to say that and to think about that, right? It's like, oh, we're in this capitalist system, et cetera. And it's really also because systems like some predictability, they like consistency. So what's gonna be the thing that alters your life and your standard of living is gonna be different than what is gonna do that for me, right? So it's hard for systems to predict, but a hole in the roof is a hole in the roof. 18 inches of water is 18 inches of water. Floorboards being unsafe, those kinds of things are consistent. And the disaster system and that machine that I spoke about earlier is really focused on how to give assistance to the most impacted. Impacted feels like the wrong word, but so that major or destroyed tends to be where the relief assistance, financial assistance goes. Even that's shifting a little bit. And that's, I think, why the advocacy that's been going on over the last 10 years, at least that I've been paying attention to it, is so crucial, because that's how you tell the story and how you make the human element be as high a priority as the property damage. But it's really about, has the place where you live been affected, or your ability to live there been affected? And that's how that stuff will get determined. And I think the other important thing is, we have people who are, like when you're going to access some assistance, if you've been impacted, you generally just need to prove who you are and that you lived in the place that was damaged. So sometimes people get weird about, oh, I don't have this ID or this thing. You need to prove who you are. You need to prove that you were connected to a place that was impacted. And if that is the case, you should go and seek assistance.
And you mentioned both of these things earlier in the show, but before we leave, I want you to just touch on them again. One, resources, the names of some of those community organizations that people could reach out to. And two, tell us once again about preparedness. What does that look like? What are the things that people should do to be prepared for the unexpected?
I think being prepared for the unexpected is understanding what the dangers are that are facing you, right? So understanding what kind of weather things you need to be worried about, understanding what are the day-to-day things that you have to maybe be concerned about, whether that be weather, whether that be things going on with your building, whether that be the general flooding in your area. And then if you're going to stay, what do you need to sustain your stay, right? So people who are, let's say, okay, if it's just about water and food, generally you can handle that. But if you have somebody in your family who has medical needs, that they need access to education, medication, the medication needs to be refrigerated, they have something that sustains their life that requires electricity, then those systems definitely are in place, right? And then for how long can you sustain yourself? And then what's the plan? What can you do? What can you do within your own community, within your neighbors, within your family? And then what do you need these other organizations or your local government to assist you with? And then where to go for help? The Red Cross is still a place to go. Definitely the criteria, right, are going to be specific, and your eligibility, et cetera. But, there are groups there are all kinds of different groups, right? Like there's a big pie and there's a bunch of different groups. I would say it's generally coordinated by your local government. So I would say one thing to do right after a storm or an event is to make sure that you can self-report your damage, right? So calling your 311, sometimes you'll be on hold for a long time. These systems, millions of people calling at the same time, and declaring to say that I live in this place. This is my name. This is how many people are in my household. these are the ages and the circumstances of us, and this is what happened to our home. This is what's happening in our community. Those things get counted and get, that information does get disseminated. And then for the Red Cross, for instance, you can call 1-800 Red Cross. Even if you can't get a hold of your local Red Cross, call 1-800 Red Cross. You say the same thing, and then that information also gets disseminated. There's lots of groups that do feeding. Salvation Army is one of the groups that also does feeding after a storm. Your local government, and then also for Miami and South Florida, I would say Miami Climate Alliance definitely is a place to pay attention to and follow on social media. The different satellite groups. I know Smile Trust does stuff. There's a lot of, community centers where you can go, and they're doing their own local, very hyper local ways of organizing supplies and also getting supplies out to people. And I think there's also this idea of community resilience, right? So it's knowing that anything can happen to you at any time and knowing what those things are as much as you can. It's knowing where to go for assistance, but also knowing where to go to contribute. Because we need help doesn't mean that we can't also give help, and knowing where either you can or where you want to offer your support, either your time, your vehicle, your money, whatever, you make those decisions on how you can support and contribute as well. And I would say keeping kind of those as pillars, and then wherever the information comes, where you can take a class, where you can get information, where you can connect to a group, on the off times, right, where it's not so emotional and where it doesn't feel so acute and critical, as much as you can do for that, then I would advise that as well. And the other thing that I would advise as well is that there are other supplemental things, not just around food, but also spiritual care. A lot of organizations will help you deal with the trauma and the emotions and the stress and anxiety of all of it as well. And I think we need to know that both as people who need help in the community, but also people who offer help, right? The trauma and the secondary trauma and all of that, it's real in all of these aspects and must be attended to as well. I can't hear.
There we go. There we go. There we go. I say you've been a breath of knowledge. We appreciate all that you have given to us today. I do remember during Hurricane Andrew, when the Salvation Army brought us food to eat, it was very refreshing to have them to come to bring us something to eat. I don't think it's every day the trucks drive down. And then the Red Cross. I still have the blanket that they gave me during Hurricane Andrew. It was just the little things that just really meant so much. And it allowed me to just really remember that humanity. I just remember people stopping at four ways where there was no stop sign, there was no traffic light, and just caring. It's in a disaster that you recognize all of the wonderful things that we sometimes take for granted. But thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate you. And to you, the Culture family, don't forget to join us tonight at 6 p.m. Well, we'll have another edition of My 2 Cents. Come back, get a drink, and stay tuned for all of the shenanigans. We'll see you tonight.
The Culture is produced and owned by the Culture Media Group and cannot be reproduced